Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and you're in for a treat today. Why? Because I'm in for a treat. Because we have back way too long and way overdue Travis Miller. So, Travis, first of all, welcome back to the podcast.
Absolutely, Tom. Thanks for having me, buddy.
Travis, I think we've had actually, you've had rather a couple of job moves since the last time we chatted. So, why don't you bring our audience up to where you are today and your current role?
Absolutely, yeah. I currently serve as Chief Strategy Officer and General Counsel with Source Intelligence. I made the move about 9 months ago from Google, where I served as the head of supply chain compliance and social responsibility, and I was handling a lot of the operational activities across the hardware teams. In my current role, I'm focused more on strategy, engagement with customers, and devising the legal and regulatory strategy for the business that's seeking to do supply chain compliance and transparency.
What is the business of source intelligence?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. So, the company itself, Source Intelligence, was founded by a series of private equity acquisitions a couple of years ago. And what they did is they purchased the CMAP platform, which, in my opinion, is probably the finest chain of custody tool for environmental product compliance. They blended that with a tool called ChainPoint, which handles all the sub tier mapping and all the actual harvesting or extractions to the first processing layer in the supply chain. Threw in two component engineering companies, Total Parts Plus as well as QTech, and then wrapped it all up with Source Intelligence, which was the namesake company focused on the ESG, the reporting space, the conflict minerals. So really an exciting company. A lot of pieces coming together, doing some really exciting and novel work.
You also have a book, Guide to Supply Chain Compliance Laws and Regulations, which is a key resource for compliance professionals. What led to that book?
I just saw a real gap in the market. People have been doing this for such a long time, and nobody ever wrote anything down. So it all had this tribal knowledge that existed inside of organizations. People really didn't have a playbook. They didn't really know what to do when they were starting to set up supply chain compliance programs. So when the American Bar Association tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Would you write one of these for us?" I jumped at the chance.
So, I'm also going to ask you about a LinkedIn post you wrote, which is called the Compliance Playbook, because you really give some, I thought, great practical advice. But we'll get to that in a little bit. The surge in supply chain compliance laws. I just was on another podcast where I heard the most incredibly prescient comment, which was essentially compliance risk management is about political risk management
Yep.
because as politics change, and it's not necessarily the politics of 2025. All administrations have their own priorities, and outside the United States, every administration in every country has their own priorities. And so managing that is essentially a compliance risk, but it's led to 2025, which I think would be fair to say have been the most gnashing of teeth in this arena in a long time. So with this global impact and global wave of supply chain regulations, how does someone in your position begin to think through staying abreast and then two, moving that over to help the operations and business folks?
It's been a really interesting time. I'd say this is probably the coolest and most in demand I've ever been as a supply chain compliance professional.
Amen,
so
brother. Amen.
I get reached out to all the time right about now. What I say is the most interesting thing and the most strategic thing is that supply chain compliance has moved from kind of a peripheral activity that was sprinkled in the engineering function, maybe a little bit in supply chain. You had some voluntary initiatives that existed in sustainability. And those are all getting fit under this new umbrella of business continuity. How do we keep the business operational? Because if you don't have parts, if you don't have raw materials, if you don't have vendors, you just cease to operate. And because of the supply chain shocks we experienced with COVID and then with tariffs and then with every new iteration of the regulations that hits, people are really considering this to be foundational. They're leaning into it, they're investing more heavily in it. Even in a time where the SaaS ecosystem's a little bit shaky, the supply chain side's never been stronger. So it's an exciting time to be in the business.
Way back when conflict minerals started, one of the comments I heard that I thought was significant was we never knew about our sub-tier suppliers. We may not have known about our tier one suppliers, but we certainly didn't know about tiers two, three, four, and five. And some companies, and I think it's fair to say you helped lead the effort in this from your positions, did a deep dive into their tiers, and they mapped those tiers out from a conflicts minerals perspective. And for many of these companies, it was the first time they had done that, and they realized, hey, we've got inefficiencies, we may have problems, we have duplications, we have some people we probably shouldn't be doing business with. And it was real eye opening, I thought, for many businesses when you guys in supply chain compliance finish those mapping exercises. So I just wanted to use as an introduction is why is supply chain mapping or sub-tier mapping, I should say, even more important today?
Yeah. One is the regulations and the impact of them. I can remember way back when the Ross regulation first came around. I had 10 years where I was telling the same story about the Sony PlayStation. They had a little cadmium in the cable, and it was the only enforcement action we had for about 10 years to point to and say, look, bad things can happen. Bad things can happen. I don't have to do that anymore. We've had 17,000 detainments worth billions of dollars for the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. The PFAS litigation, it's as big as the asbestos litigation. There's tens of billions of dollars worth of settlements that have gone out. The REACH regulation enforcement actions, the Ross enforcement actions, you can look them up on the websites. Like they're available everywhere. There's just so much attention being paid to this area that you really just can't ignore it anymore. And then on the other side of the coin is that it's no longer just a compliance issue. It's no longer just I have risks I have to absorb. It's becoming more and more of a strategic advantage. But let's just say all of a sudden we can't buy iron and steel from Russia. That happened about a year ago. How do you even know where to begin if you don't know that you have iron and steel or that it might have come from Russia? So if you're the first mover, if you can anticipate things, if you have that visibility, you can be securing your supply chain or those secondary sources and that access to those critical materials when everybody else is just trying to figure out if they have it. So it's really emerged as a super interesting topic and one that I think everybody's paying a ton of attention to right
Let me move from looking downward
now.
in your own organization to maybe looking outward from your organization in the context of full materials declarations
Yes.
and why they become so essential and so important for large scale compliance programs.
Yeah. So full material declarations are not a new concept. Foundationally, when you're exchanging or you're trading data to get to compliance, there's only three ways to do it. You can have a letter, a legal letter, a declaration of conformity. Somebody signed it up and it doesn't really say anything, but it's there. You can have a spec where you say, none of these materials can be in my product and contractually you agree to that. Or you can have knowledge of everything that's in the product. That's the full material declaration, all the substances. What made that so interesting and so intriguing, what's breathed new life into it, because a lot of people said, oh, this is nearly impossible. I'll never get there and I could do these easier things. Well, now, if you have to do sub-tier mapping, the FMD is the backbone. It tells you what the nested bill of materials looks like. It tells you what that recipe is, what those ingredients are. And by doing so, now you can research and figure out who are the entities that provide it, who might be the party that's available in the sub-tier. Because when you get to things like palladium, like critical minerals, some of these hot topics du jour, there's only so many places in the world you can get them from. And if all of a sudden China puts an export ban on critical minerals and you know you've got critical minerals in your supply chain, you've got to pivot to one of the two or three alternative sources, whether it's Canada or Australia or a mine that's opening up somewhere in Nevada. And if you know that because you have FMD, you can really get ahead of people that are still trying to figure out what to do.
Why are data accuracy and supplier cooperation so key for these?
Yeah, so I think we have to change our perspective. The supply chain relationships that we've had for decades have always been a bit adversarial. Like we negotiate on price, we negotiate on delivery, we hold each other accountable. Everybody's trying to push the work up and down the supply chain. So historically, we just kind of flow down this work onto our suppliers and say, do it, you have to do it. But the problem is that with enough people doing that, they just get exhausted. They can't handle it. It's not contractually baked in. They don't have the volume. They don't have the capacity to do it. And if they're giving that declaration or that content, we want to make that as streamlined and as easy as possible. Lest that supplier fatigue just breaks the entire supply chain down. We don't even have knowledge because people won't be able to respond to the 6,000 tickets that are in their queue right now. Whereas if we take that FMD and we can take the work on, we can interpret, we can automate it, we can use the new AI tools to evaluate that chemistry against all the potential regulations. Think about the burden we've just lifted off of our suppliers. And we allow them to focus on really meaningful engagement, things that we have to be able to do so that we can stay in compliance, stay in business.
Well, that really leads into the next area I wanted to explore with you, which was directly AI. One, how is AI transforming the supply chain compliance process? And equally importantly, what's the importance of balancing automation with the human judgment?
Yeah, I'd say the time I spent at Google was some of the most valuable time in my career. Like I got a healthy dose of what was possible, like what you could do with some of these large language models and machine learning algorithms. And it was just incredible, eye opening when I came out. For so long, like I had focused on how do I operationalize things? How do I make them bigger? And then when I looked at people that then took some of these AI models and tried to implement them from an operational perspective, they kept failing. And the reason they kept failing, pragmatically speaking, was because they were trying to do things in a black box. They just assumed that the AI could do all this activity and it would generate these millions of dollars worth of returns. So I could spend X number of untold dollars. And via the MIT study, that's why 95% of the projects were failing. They had to focus instead, and this is where the AI really earns its salt, is to automating the arduous. I call it picking up nickels. Like keep finding those activities that are repeatable, that can happen, that can be accessed, that people can look at, that they can watch, that they can see if it breaks. And then you can set up another AI agent so the two are actually interacting with each other. So why do you do that? Because one can hallucinate, two probably won't hallucinate about the same thing. So one's going to curate, one's going to be a quality control for the other. And if it finds a discrepancy, it's going to call in the human. They can look at it, and as long as it's decipherable, as long as you know what that AI was trying to do, what that tool was trying to do, that multi-agent model allows you to do amazing things. So in my opinion, like the AI of tomorrow is not going to be this black box that just does everything. Like we keep seeing that consistently fails. What it's going to be is a bunch of little agents that are finely tuned, that are very precise at a given task, and they can repeatedly do it with a near perfect accuracy, better and quicker than any human could. And then when all of them are existing in kind of this network, they all are checking each other and they're calling in the human in the loop anytime an error is detected. And that's what the human fixes. I think that becomes kind of the future of work, and I'm excited to bring it to life.
Could there be an AI agent managing the discrete individual AIs doing specific tasks?
There has to be, in my opinion. The army of these AI agents that can be unleashed, this multi agent world, in my opinion, kind of has three essential ones, particularly for supply chain, because that's my area. So the first is kind of this orchestration agent. It takes your request as a user and it says, what do you need to do? What are you trying to accomplish here, Tom? Then it breaks down your request into individual tasks. Those tasks then get delegated to agents that are going to go do that task. So those are the operationals. This is kind of like agent one, agent zero to agent one. And then those operational agents then reach out to all the sub agents. So this is what I kind of think of as agent two. And agent two is configured, it's secure, it sits on top of a database of information, and it's been told what it's allowed to disclose and what it's not. So that's how it prepares the content. So if you think about that, what that enables is that almost in real time, this is what like a digital product passport could be. You could scan a QRS code with a very specific instruction, It could go to that orchestration agent that could break down the request into finite parts and then ping every one of those suppliers, every one of those sub-tier entities, and ask them for this critical piece of information that it's already agreed to disclose. So you could almost have real-time visibility of data. I call it just-in-time data to allow you to communicate your compliance status and then always have that human in the loop that's double checking, engaging, and making sure that it checks out. So that's how I see it kind of come into fruition.
What's the role of the supply chain professional going to be in 3 to 5 years, Travis?
I think it's a technical role. I think it becomes two sides. People are always going to buy from people. Those relationships are going to become that much more important. And then there's going to be people that are going to have an oversight and a technical role. So they're going to be much more akin to kind of like your PLM managers, your product lifecycle management folks, people that are running large scale systems. That, in my mind, is probably where the supply chain professional goes. They become much more technical, much more an IT resource, and then much more relationship driven. That's how I see it kind of coming to fruition.
That's not what I was expecting. Well, let's explore what I was expecting.
Sure, sure.
And strategy, because one
Yes,
of the things I wanted to ask you was, at this point in time, 2025, I see supply chain having greater visibility at the board level than I have ever seen it have previously.
100%.
And the same is true for those in export control, perhaps for other reasons. Nevertheless, we've seen an elevation of part of compliance to visibility I hadn't seen. And I had thought that would mean that the supply chain compliance professional might finally become the full partner, certainly with a chief compliance officer or others at that level with visibility to the board. What's the role
Yeah.
of supply chain compliance in the overall strategic vision, which would be set by the board, or really you don't really see that at all either?
I think it gains increased visibility, particularly the area of supply chain compliance. And I had forecasted a little bit in my book that I could see a chief supply chain officer or chief supply chain compliance officer emerging as a role. I feel more that kind of what I've seen in the large corporates, that role probably elevates, but it still exists under that chief compliance officer, that general counsel type of a role. I just think it becomes more prominent, kind of moving up into the area. They get a little bit more insight, a little bit more discretion. I think the board becomes a little bit more interested. I actually think strategic acquisition and those relationships become infinitely more interesting. And we're seeing that. Take, for example, NVIDIA, the most valuable company in the world. They are not making the AI a lot of the time. They're the infrastructure partner that's supplying that commodity, those critical chips, those critical GPUs. A recent investment I had was in the rare earth company MP. That was the only one in North America. Huge surge in value because it's those critical acquisitions, the ability to get these finite limited resources. If anything along the scale that we're talking about with AI comes to fruition, which is like $10 trillion invested over the next decade, that's a mind boggling number to make the data centers, to keep these things humming. There's not going to be enough energy. There's not going to be enough commodities. There's not going to be enough electronics. It's impossible with the amount of resources that we have in the world to do that. So the people that will win that race are the people that have the strategic relationships and can acquire those resources. So I do think that becomes a very critical area that the board has to consider and that the businesses will either succeed or fail based upon.
Travis, I'd like to spend a few minutes, if I could, going through your LinkedIn post, which you've entitled "The
Sure.
Compliance Playbook is Broken and Here's How to Fix It." And I want to do it for maybe two or three reasons. Number one, it is, first of all, this is written exactly how Travis talks. And by that, I mean, he can be very direct, he can have a little fun, he can be a little sarcastic, but his point is always grounded in not sort of highfalutin language, but here's how you do it. So I thought it was a great article for that reason, because I could just hear your voice as I was reading it. And you really go through some pretty specific issues that people have, and you explain why it's a problem or why it's not. And it's really the four market realities you can't ignore. Number one is your 30% response rate isn't a supplier problem. And I know you've answered that in the body of our podcast, but why is that true?
Yeah, so this is the supplier fatigue issue, the phenomenon that we encounter on a day-to-day basis. And I often like to use the analogy, if all you got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. We just keep sending out these surveys on repeat. Now, back in the day when all we had was Ross and then Reach and then maybe conflict minerals, you could probably get away with that. Like you had 4 or 5 surveys that you had to send out a year. People would respond to them with the button clicks, and then something would change. So you reset. You went all the way back down to zero, and you asked the supplier exactly the same question again. Where we're at today, like there are roughly 2,000 plus supply chain regulations, and nobody's handling all of them, at least not effectively. If you were to send out one campaign a year for every one of those, every single customer of a supplier would be dealing with 2,000 requests per customer. It's an impossibility. They are going to break, and we are breaking them. We are breaking our supply chain's ability to respond to us and get us this business critical information. So, pragmatically speaking, the problem is not them. They have the data, they have the ability to communicate with you. We're just asking the wrong questions. We're not making it easy for them. We're not making it possible. We're not doing our side of the work, which is to ingest that FMD data and make it usable, meaningful, and accessible for the purposes that we have.
Number two was portals. And what intrigued me
Mm,
here was there was a time when portals were pretty innovative, but it
yeah.
showed that innovation doesn't last forever. And what may have been innovative 10 or 15 years ago may need to be reconsidered now. So tell us the current problems you see with portals and maybe how we can overcome those.
Yeah. And I was probably one of the biggest proponents globally of portals. I spent huge innovation at different companies and time trying to do it. I was key to the microchip portal, which still allows like self service, which is beautiful. The problem is that when the portals cease to become an engagement vehicle and they start to become a taskmaster, and when all the portals are different everywhere, it's inundated, it's iterative, it keeps adding more bricks. We've gotten to the point where everybody hates portals. Nobody wants to stop their day, click on a link, try to figure out how to log into this thing, fat finger in a bunch of information, and try to transmit it. And the nice thing is that over the last 2 years, we moved to a world where we don't have to do that anymore. It's not the most efficient way to exchange data. You can literally send an email with an attachment, and an AI agent can come and pick that up. It can review it. It can tell you what's wrong with it. It can communicate back in the same way as a chatbot does. It can ingest that data. It can flag it. It can take that unstructured information and put it into the system. This is the stuff where innovation has gone, and it's really sunsetted a lot of the value that those old portals used to be able to give, because now you can do so much with just the data itself.
Number three is entitled Your Low Response Rate is Masking Real Business Risk. But in reading this, Travis, it struck me that you're actually critiquing response rates as a metric and why that's an inappropriate or useless metric now. If I can go that far. Why is this such a problem?
Yeah, we've all been fixated on this concept that the supplier has to push a series of buttons to kind of let you through. And it reminds me of an old joke that I always get when I talk to all my other tech nerds that grew up with video games. Up, down, left, A, B, select, start. Like, if you know what that is, it's how you got a bunch more lives in Contra. Like, we get started, and everybody has it memorized that came from a certain generation. Now, that doesn't mean that you were any good at playing the game. That didn't mean that you knew what you were doing. It just meant that you know how to push a series of buttons, and then you got the bonus. You got the agreement to do it. So, what I think we need to transition those KPIs from is not does somebody know how to push a series of buttons, but is the information that they're disclosing meaningful? Is it useful? Can I take that data and give myself coverage that allows me to assess risk? And that's where I think this transition to FMD has really caught wind, where people are really paying attention to it. They're like, I don't need another letter that doesn't tell me anything. What I need is materials information that I can digest and I can make my program evergreen. I can evaluate the risk myself.
The next one actually I thought was your best title because it completely encapsulated what I saw was the issue in reading it. And the title reads, Automation isn't the problem, manual work is the bottleneck. And what I got out of that, Travis, was it doesn't matter how great your automation is, it doesn't really matter how much you invent, innovate, or spend. If you've still got manual processes somewhere, that's going to be the bottleneck. And you really need to think through what's your process. My wife is a process engineer, so I hear that a lot. So, why are these manual bottlenecks still befuddling us so much?
Because people will tend to automate things that have high visibility, and then they'll put the burden on somebody. And that bottleneck will then continue to build. It will exist. People will turn over. Activities will happen. And I talk routinely to companies that have these queues of requests that have come in, and they'll be 4, 5, 6,000 deep, like tickets that are sitting there for somebody to go in action. It doesn't matter how many human beings you put onto something like that. It's never going to self-service itself. You're never going to be able to keep up with that volume. And for the moment that you start to fall behind pace, that ticketing system just grows and grows. So you could have the most beautiful system of record in the world. You could have a wonderful campaign that goes out to suppliers, all automated. But if your response to your own customers is the bottleneck and that's still handled manually, up goes your ticket inventory. That's the problem, is that we have to think about automation soup to nuts, like completely across the board. From the original design, the PLM, the ERPs, the ordering systems, the global trade management tools, all of those processes go through a middleware that routes the requests and the data through automation to the other systems that need it. And if we really think these things through, it's going to save us so much time and money and make us so much better of both a supplier and a customer partner.
Travis, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode. But before we leave, I wanted to ask you if our listeners wanted to connect with you on LinkedIn or other platforms, could they do? And if so, how? And then could you give us, at least tell us the link for your book published by the ABA? And we'll, of course, cite to that in the show notes as well. So, how can listeners follow up with you if they want to?
Yeah, I'd love for people to reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's my primary medium for social engagement. You can find me, Travis Miller. It's also part of Source Intelligence, so that's an easy way to look me up. In terms of reaching out to the company, we'd love to have you. It's absolutely fantastic. We have webinars, content pieces. I regularly tour around the country as well as across a good bit of Europe. So I'll be at some place local next to you at some point, probably talking about some of this great stuff. And then, of course, the American Bar Association still features the book. Love those guys. Great publisher. And you always can order the book. I'd be honored if you did.
Travis, this, as I said when we started, it's way too long. I will not let this go this distance again between podcasts. I wanted to thank you again and look forward to catching up with you as well.
Absolutely. Appreciate your time. Have a good day, my man.